Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. Today we're going to be learning how to build an iOS toggle, an iOS switch, a mobile toggle, whatever you guys want to call it. This is what we're going to be building. Just kind of show you guys how it works here. This is pure HTML, CSS, and just a tiny bit of vanilla JavaScript. We're not going to be using any packages or frameworks today, and that is the goal of this video. This continues the series that I started a while ago where we learn to build simple, common user interface elements without needing to pull in any packages. We're all guilty of it. We know we need like a date picker or an accordion or like a basic slider or a nice checkbox, and what do? We go and we find a package to do it. These packages are bloated. You don't need all of the stuff in there. A lot of times you can build these from scratch with keeping it very, very simple and cutting down the size of your website, your CSS and JavaScript files, okay? So that's exactly what we're gonna be doing today. We are going to learn to build this toggle. I'm gonna show you guys how to do it, starting from nothing and getting to this finished result. And we're not going to be using anything other than just a couple lines of vanilla JavaScript and then a bunch of some HTML and some CSS. It's a lot easier than you think. All right, so let's get started. So let's go ahead and get started on this project. Now, before we jump into the actual code, I want to go over a couple components so it makes sense while we're building out the project, what's going on. So this is the finished project. This is what it's going to look like. So as you can see, this is a checkbox that has no label, but this is currently turned off, right? You click it, it turns on. You see a transition and you see this little toggle, this little button move from the left to the right. So this is the off position, this is the right position. And you can see as you click it that basically to indicate that it's off, we make the background color over here gray. That's kind of like an inactive state. And then when it's active, we have a nice bright successful color like green, okay? And of course you can change these colors, but you've got something, you're basically going from no color to color. It indicates to the user that that's successful. Now, a couple of the components here, you'll see this is the body of we have this background component here. And if we think about this visually from what we're gonna be creating with the HTML, how this is gonna be structured, you can see here that we basically are gonna have some sort of wrapper container that you can't currently see. Okay, this wrapper container is it's a wrapper for the entire component. That's gonna allow you to plop multiple of those down, and everything's contained inside of a single element. Instead of pulling these out and having multiple parent level elements, you've got one parent element per thing here. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now inside of there, we've got two elements inside of that mainly. You've got your actual switch, you've got the label, and then there is a checkbox over here that you can't see. It's currently turned off. Okay, so those are the three components that we've got that are basically child elements of that wrapper. And none of these, the checkbox and the label, they don't currently have any children themselves, but you will have children inside of here because we are going to be having, first of all, you've got this background component. That's the oval that you see here that changes colors. So we've got that background component, and then we've got the little switch that moves left and right, this toggle, which is another component, okay? So those are kind of two other components involved, and that's really it. That's the whole structure, okay? So that's what we're working with. Now, I mentioned checkboxes, and this is another important thing. These are designed to be put into forms. A lot of times these populate, settings of a web application, and you'll have a whole bunch of these down the line. These are very visual ways to display checkboxes, okay? They're a little more fun to play with, a little more visually appealing, but really they're a checkbox. They have two states. They have on and off, right? This is off, this is on, and you can turn it on and back off. That's all these are. These are just really pretty checkboxes, okay? And so what's really happening behind the scenes is we have a hidden checkbox that's being enabled and disabled depending on the state of the visual component here. These visual components, this actual toggle doesn't do anything. It's only visual to the user. And behind the scenes, there's a hidden checkbox that's being enabled and that's being checked and unchecked depending on the status of this visual component, okay? The users are concerned about the visual component, but when you submit a form back to this server, it's going to, because there's actual checkboxes, even though they're hidden, there's checkboxes behind all of these. Those are going to be submitted to the part of the form, okay? So that's how these all work. So now that you kind of have an understanding of visual representation of how these work, let's jump over and start working on the actual HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make these happen. Okay, so we're going to be recreating these. Take a little snapshot if you want. We're going to be putting these back together. Going back to what I said earlier, we need one big wrapper component that represents the entire project. So let's go ahead and do that. So we do div class and just create this wrapper. Now I'm going to call this iOS switch. And let's go ahead and close that div down here. Now inside of here, we're going to actually, this is just the wrapper. There's not much going on here, but it's going to contain everything, including that invisible checkbox, the label, and the actual switch itself, okay? So let's create the switch. So to create the switch, we'll just create another div here, and we'll call this the switch body, okay? This is the core body, that oval part that you saw. And then inside of here, we're going to have that toggle. That's the round part that moves back and forth inside of the body. Let's go ahead and create that. And we're just going to call this toggle. And that's really it. Okay, let's go ahead and close that div. And then we also have this div is outstanding. Div. And there we go. Not sure what that's about. Okay, so that's the core component. Now we do have our label and our checkbox. Let's go ahead and set those up. We can set those up inside of this wrapper, but we don't want that inside with the actual switch, right? Those sit alongside the switch. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna go div class, or actually no, we're not going to. We're just gonna do a label, right? So let's just create a label and we'll just say hello world. And then let's go ahead and create the actual checkbox that we're gonna be working with. So we'll just do input type equals checkbox, and you can give it a name if you wanted to submit it to the form, right? All right, so that's basically it. That's the core markup. That's it for HTML, guys. That's all that you need. Pretty easy stuff. Vanilla CSS, it'll be a little bit dirtier, but it'll work. First of all, let's start by styling the iOS switch. That's this core component here. This is just the wrapper element, so there's not much going on here. Now, the only thing we really need to worry about is just giving it some display properties, giving it some alignment and things like that, giving some spacing if you have elements stacked on top of each other and stuff like that. So pretty easy stuff. Let's go ahead and just target it with iOS switch, and we will just give this a display property of flex. The reason we'll do that is just because it's 2019, right? We want to use Flexbox as much as possible if we can. And that's just going to make things easier too, because we can align things vertically. So inside of here, all of these are basically inline components, right? We have the switch body, which is going to be aligned over on one side. Then we have the label that's going to be aligned on next to it, right? And we want these to be vertically, we want these to match. The label might actually be shorter than the body of the switch. So we don't want those both to be like up, like we want those to be middle aligned, right? So they look nice and flat and even like they belong. So let's go ahead and do that. We can do that by, you don't need to do this necessarily, but we'll just be explicit. We'll say flex direction row, and that's going to mean that to vertically align stuff, we use align content. We're actually gonna use align items and just say center, and that's just because we're gonna want to pass that to any children as well, like this, okay? So that's basically it. That's all we really need. If you had multiple of these, you could give them a margin just to give spacing around these wrappers. So for example, margin, you could just give this a margin of like 10 pixels. All right, that's just gonna give it vertical margin, so if these are stacked on top of each other, they have a little spacing in between them. Okay, and that's really it. That's just our wrapper component. Nothing crazy going on there. Okay, next, these are pretty easy to style. They're just gonna be some text, and then we're gonna hide this checkbox. I'm gonna keep the text box visible for now, just so that you guys can see it being enabled and disabled as we work. Okay, next, what we'll do is just work on this switch body here. So let's go ahead and target that. I'm gonna use iOS switch body, and that's going to allow me to grab the switch bodies that are inside of an iOS switch component, and then from inside of there we can start working on this switch body. All right, now remember when I said earlier we're going to add an active class when we want to enable this element? So this is going to be basically the turned off state. This is the off state of this switch. Okay, so if we do that, we're just going to say in the off state, right, you're going to give it a background color of like a gray. So we're gonna do like a light gray, which is like this hex code of DDD is like it's a very light gray, almost white, but it is gray. Just kind of looks nice. I think this is roughly equivalent to white smoke, the default color white smoke. So we'll just go ahead and set that up. Then let's go ahead and also give this a border. There is a border around it, so we're gonna give this a border. We'll give it a solid border, 1 pixel, and we'll just use the default color of gray. That'll work good for now. And of course you can customize this yourself. Now you see a little tiny dot here, and that's because that's all the component really is right now. It's this little dot because it doesn't have any width or height. Okay, so we need to give it some width and some height. So the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna give it a width of 96 pixels. Now this is really big. Normally I would do something like 48 pixels, but I just want you guys to see that, I want you guys to see it nice and big here since we're doing a screencast, okay? So the reason 96 is nice because 96 is divisible by 12 and 16, so it's kind of one of those golden numbers. 48 is another one of those numbers, divisible by 12 and 16, okay? So just keep that in mind. That's why we like those numbers. They're like these golden numbers, right? So we're just gonna stick with 96. So it's got a width of 96. You guys see now this is converted to a line. That's because it's got a body of 96, but it's got no height, right? The way we're gonna define the height is just let it inherit from the child. So we're gonna give the child a height, which is then gonna expand the parent. So we're actually just gonna leave this alone for a moment. Let's go ahead and start working on the child, which is the little toggle. This is the round component inside that moves left and right. So let's go ahead and target this now. So we'll just say iOS-switch.switch.body.toggle. And let's go ahead and give this a width and a height. So let's say width, and we'll do 48 pixels because that's half of 96. So 48 pixels, and let's also give it now a height of 48 pixels. Okay, and now you can see as soon as we did that, now the body kind of took shape because now there's a component in here that we can't see that there's a component there that we can't see that's giving it that height. Now, of course, all we need to do to see it is give it a color, right? So let's give this a background color of white, and we should now see it. There it is. So this now is the switch. This is the actual body, the toggle that moves back and forth. Now, let's go back to rounded corners because that's what our component's gonna look like, right? It's got those rounded corners. So our body needs to be that oval shape and our toggle needs to be a circle. Now, the way we do that is just do border radius 50%. And that's gonna now give our little toggle and make it circle, right? And we can go up to the body and do the same thing, give it rounded corners as well. And the way we'll do that is with border radius, but you don't really want to do 50% in this case because 50% on a non-perfect circle, it's longer than it is tall, creates this oval shape, right? Instead, we want a rounded rectangle. So there's like a trick you can do where you can obviously do exactly half of this, which is 48. So we can do So we can do a border radius of 48 pixels, and that's going to give you that nice shape, right? Because it works out perfectly. However, there is another trick you can do. You can just do something like 999 or 9,999 of pixels. So that means it's not going to create that oval shape. It's going to give you the rounded rectangle, but it's always going to be more than you probably ever need. So even if you made this bigger, you're always going to get that perfect round oval thing. Okay, so that's one trick that we're going to do. And now you can see we've got some shape coming together, right? It's starting to come together. Now there are a few things to make this look a little bit nicer. First of all, we do like to give this, the actual toggle, we want to give that a border, just give it something to look, to work with. Also, there's usually a shadow on this border to make it look like that toggle is poking up out of the background. And then the background itself usually has a shadow that's inset, and what that means that it looks like it's pushed inside of the page. Okay, so let's just add those styles and the border, and that's just gonna make it look a little nicer. And these are all very cosmetic, okay? So again, for the body, let's work with that. We've got that inset shadow, so we can do something like box shadow. And the box shadow itself will be inset. So we're just gonna say inset, and we'll give it, I've actually already kind of worked this out with some trial and error. So we do 0, 2 pixels, 4 pixels, and then 0, and then give it the color. And we'll just do a black, but we'll make it only 10%. Okay, that'll make it nice and light. And you can see here that we get this nice, really subtle indentation look. Now, if I comment this out, you'll see that go away. It looks flat. Bring it back, and it gives you that depth, right? It just looks subtle and nice. It's a good little look. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can do the same thing for the toggle. Give the toggle look like it coming out, so that means it needs a normal box shadow. And we're gonna basically give it the same box shadow, but it's just gonna be coming out. So down over here on the toggle, let's go ahead and give it that box shadow. And we will just say, instead of inset, we're gonna leave inset so it comes out, but we'll just do the exact same one. So 0, 2 pixels, 4 pixels, 0, and then give it the color, RGBA, of 0, 0, 0, 0. And then I just did a little darker, so 25%. And there you go. So now you can see that this button kind of pops off the page a little bit. Optionally, you can add a border to it. I'm gonna add a border here real quick, solid, 1 pixel, and gray. And there you go. Just gives it that little border on the outside. Okay. After that, that's basically everything. Now there is a couple components that we need to work with. There's one gotcha that I've had, and that's with box sizing. Because we have this 1 pixel on either side, you've got a couple pixels that are off because of this border. So we're just gonna change the box sizing to accommodate the border, and that's by changing the box sizing property. So box sizing, border box, and of course. Anyway, this really should be the default CSS setting is border box, but it's not. So anyway, that's what we've got to deal with. So we've got that set up and I think that's really it. That's really all that we need to work with is that. Now there are some transition properties we're going to need to make, but we'll come back to that as well. So we have the basic look. Now let's go ahead, let's actually copy this component and let's now style an active version. And then once we have that, we can create the transition between the two, and then we will add the JavaScript to actually make it move. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at right now. So we've got kind of this is our toggle, our off toggle. That looks good and that works. All right, so we basically have our primary component, right? So now the next thing is we want to, when we add that active class, we're gonna want our component, our switch to change to look like it's active, right? And that basically comes through 2 changes. We want to change the background color of this body, change it from being a gray to being a green. And then the other way is we want to move the toggle over to the right, okay? So it's on the right side of the component now, so it slides over. That's really the only 2 things we need to do to indicate that it's changed. So let's go ahead and do that. So over here in the CSS, I'm gonna come down and we're going to now create some other targets here. So we'll do iOS switch dot switch body. Oh, sorry, actually, no, we want to do iOS switch and then no space because we want to target when it's active, okay? So when the iOS switch also has the active class, then we want to grab the switch body and we want the switch body to have a different background color. So we're going to change that background color to be the green color, okay? And the green color that I like is 51D88A. There we go. And it's going to look good. So keep in mind, I added active to this bottom iOS switch and we didn't add it to the top. So what we can see here in our display, this is an inactive state. This is an active one, right? We're not worrying about the transition yet, just like styling what they look separately, and then we'll add the transition so it can, move smoothly between the two. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like when it's active. It's got that green color. It looks really good, right? That's really it. So hopefully this makes sense. Remember, we're adding the active class over here on the iOS switch component, but then we want to target and style the switch body child of it. And that's why we have this class here, this CSS class. So we have iOS switch with the active class. Then we have a space to indicate that this switch body is a style of it, okay? You could also do a direct descendant by doing the greater than sign, but this is fine. This is gonna work good. Okay, now the next thing we wanna do is we also wanna target the toggle, okay? We want the toggle to move over. So we're gonna do another target here. We'll do switch.active.switchBody space.toggle, and this time we're targeting the actual toggle if it's got the active class on this iOS switch. And all we want to do now is we want to move that component over basically its body height, okay? So remember that the entire thing is 96 pixels. The toggle is half of that width, which is 48 pixels. So we want to move it over exactly its full body width. So we want to move it over 48 pixels, which means it'll now be on the other side, okay? So that's all we're going to do here. We're going to use the translate. So you're going to transform. We're going to transform it, and then we're going to tell it to transform it by translating it, which means to move in the x-axis, and we're going to tell it to move over 100%. Okay? And sure enough, you can see here what it did. So we have the inactive and the active, and it moves between the two. Okay, and that's it, guys. That's really, we now have the two things there. So now the only thing we need to do is we need to be able to transition between the two. We'll come back to that though. Let's go ahead and add our JavaScript, and just so that you can click on these components. Actually, before we do the JavaScript, we'll just do some styling here with a couple other elements. So let's grab the label, and we'll just say, of course, you probably want to do something like iOS switch label, and then we'll just grab a font size, font weight, bold, and again, you can customize these however you want. I also want to give it some space between the text and the component here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do margin left, 10 pixels. That's just going to move it out a little bit. And then that's really it. Font family you can change. Again, not super important. Okay, that's basically it. That's all we need to do for that. And then the other component here is we want to hide this input box. So we'll just do iOS switch input type equals checkbox. And actually, we don't need this. Okay, so, and that's going to grab the checkbox that's inside of the iOS switch. And this you can just do display. All right. And that's going to hide the checkbox. So now we've got a finished component. It doesn't have the transition, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so I am going to just right now comment out this one so we can see the checkbox, just so you can see it being checked and unchecked. We'll hide it at the end. Okay, that's it. Now let's work on the JavaScript. So what we want to do is when we click on this component, we want to transition from one state to the X. That's basically it. And we're going to do that by adding or removing that active class. Okay, so to do that, we can just grab we want to grab all the switches on the page. So we're going to start by just grabbing switches, and we'll just say grab switches, document, we'll do query selector all. All right, and we're just going to tell it to grab everything that is the iOS switch. Okay, so we'll do dot iOS dash switch. Now that we got the switches, the next thing we want to do is those are all stored in the switches variable. We're just going to loop through that variable and add an event listener to each of the ones on the page, so that whenever we click one of those, we can run a function. So the next thing here is we're just going to do a basic loop. So we'll just grab variable here I equals 0, and as long as I is less than switches, did I spell it right? Yep, dot length. There we go. And all right, and then we want to I++ on each iteration. And I just realized, okay. That's it. All right, so then inside of here, this is going to be what we want to do for every single component. So we're going to basically find all the components, all the switches, loop through them. What do we want to do? We want to add an event listener. So we're going to grab the switches. It's going to come in as an array, right? This is going to be an array of elements. So we'll grab switches with the index that we're currently looping through, and then we will add the event listener. And we're going to do a click, and then we'll grab the function event, and we'll just have an anonymous function inside of there. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to see if the component currently has the class of active. If it has the class of active, that means it's already active. We want to remove that class, and we want to uncheck the checkbox. If it has the, let's see, if it doesn't have the active class, we want to go ahead and add the active class and check the checkbox, okay? So we want to know if it's currently active or inactive. So we'll do that by just doing an if statement to see if it has the active class or not. Okay, so inside this function, we'll just say if, and we'll just grab this dot class list, and that'll grab all the classes for the iOS switch because of that. This dot class list dot contains active. Okay, and we're just going to see if it contains the active class inside of there. And if it does, then this is kind of hard because of the We might need to, let's do this. Okay. There we go. That makes it easier to read. I was having a hard time reading it. Okay, so if this.classlist.contains active, then we want to enter this part of the loop, and all we're going to basically do is we're just going to go this.classlist.remove active. Okay, and then after that, we're also going to want to go ahead and we're removing the active class. That's going to move the input to look like it's disabled or it's gray and stuff, like it's inactive. But we also want to uncheck the checkbox. Okay, so that checkbox means it should be checked, so we want to uncheck the checkbox. So we'll just do this dot query selector, and you can mess around with these, but we're just gonna we're gonna look for the child of iOS switch that has an input of type of checkbox, okay? So that's what I'm doing here. So we're gonna say type equals checkbox. Once we find it, we'll say checked equals false. Now, obviously, if we do, we're going to want an else statement. And if this else statement means that the checkbox, because we currently check to see if it's active, so we need to see if it's inactive. So we can assume that this means it doesn't have the active class. So that means it's currently inactive, and we want to, since it's been clicked now, we want to enable it. So in that case, we are adding the class. So we go to this.classlist.add active. And then we also want to do the opposite here. We'll do this.query selector. Input type all right, and that's basically it. So that now should work. So now let's come over here and this should be refreshed, right? Pen saved. Okay, so now let's uncheck this. You can see here that as we uncheck it, it goes gray and it moves over to the left and it's unchecked. The checkbox is unchecked, and then as we enable it, you can see it's working, right? Check it, uncheck it, check it, uncheck it, and it works. Perfect, right? Last thing we want to do, we can hide these checkboxes. Let's just uncomment this out. Now the checkboxes are hidden. I just wanted you guys to see the checkboxes being checked and unchecked. They're still being checked and unchecked, you just can't see them. Okay, so we'll just display none, so the user can't see them, but it's still being handled with these toggles, okay? Let's make that a little better. There we go. Okay, perfect. And because we have these align center, this label is always going to match up in the middle of our component here. Last thing we want to do is we want this to be a nice smooth transition. You guys remember when I did mine, it was nice and smooth. That's really easy to do. All we need to do is come down to our iOS switch body, add a transition element so that when we transition that background color, that it is a smooth transition instead of a halt immediate transition. And we'll do the same thing here with the toggle. So let's come down here. Let's add let's grab this over there. Okay. Transition, and we'll just, hold on. There we go. I was wondering why I wasn't color coding. Okay, so then we'll just do here, we're gonna say transition. You can just do background color if you'd like, or you can do all, and we'll just do all zero. I did 0.2 seconds, but you can of course change this, and I just did ease. All right, and then for the toggle, you have two components here. So this is going to be the background, which is basically the change from gray to green and green to gray. And then you've got to also add a transition element to and then we'll just add our transition here. We'll just add a transition of all. And again, remember this is switch body toggle. So this is the actual toggle component. So this is the translating, which is what we're transitioning now. And we'll just say all and 0.4 seconds. I like to do the toggle a little longer than the transition, or maybe like 3-5 seconds, and then we'll just do ease as well. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and save that. Close. What did we screw up on something? Sometimes it just does that. Okay, so now you can see when we click them, you get that nice transition. All right, now you'll notice here I've made that background color. It fades a little faster than the toggle moves over, and that's just personal preference. If you want that thing to be a little faster, you can just come up here and you can change it down to like 0.2 seconds, right? And now it's gonna move faster. See how much faster it is? So you can do that however you like. A little bit slower. There you go. enjoy it a little bit more, okay? And that's basically it, guys. That is all that we got. Now, if you submit that form, there are hidden checkboxes behind here. So you'll still name those checkboxes. Like here we have input, name those checkboxes, and those will now show up when you submit the form. It'll just show up like a normal checkbox. But your users will have this beautiful experience where they can this delightful experience where they have these little iOS style toggles. So it's just a little more fun than like the little tiny checkboxes that are hard to style and hard to like make look good. The other thing is like checkboxes tend to look different on different browsers. So like Firefox, Chrome, Windows, Mac, it's going to look different. And then of course you've got, your mobile devices. It looks different on all of those. Checkboxes look different, whereas this allows you to be consistent. So every user is going to get that custom experience because we're showing a custom styled element, not a actual like checkbox, a default UI checkbox. Okay? So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. That is a no frameworks way, not using any frameworks, we were able to build an iOS switch. And of course, this is pretty easy to put together. You can see how simple it really is. It's just a couple elements here, and the CSS is really not that hard once you sit down and break it out. And then the JavaScript is pretty simple. All we really are doing is grabbing adding an event lister here, and then we check to see if again, it's easier if we style that out. All we basically do is we grab all the switches, we loop through the switches to add an event listener to each one, and then we add this anonymous function when an element is quicked. And this anonymous function here just simply looks to see if it's currently set to active, and if it is, it removes that active class and unchecks the checkbox, and if it doesn't have that active class, in this case, then it goes ahead and adds an active class to give it that styling that it's active, and then it goes ahead and also checks the checkbox so that when the form is submitted, it will work, okay? And that's it. It really isn't that hard. And so hopefully you guys did learn, taking a moment to kind of step back. You may not need frameworks for this, or even if you do need frameworks, at least now you know how they work behind the scenes, okay? So hopefully you guys enjoyed learning that. Now, what I am thinking about doing is maybe in the next video, because a lot of people have asked me about learning how to work with view components. You guys wanted to see how you can build a view component. So what I'm thinking about doing is the next video, I'm actually going to take what we did here, and we're just going to convert this plain vanilla thing into a view component. So it'll be a view.js component. And so we'll just use everything we learned here, but just converting it into view.js components so you can just use it like that, okay? So that's probably what we'll be doing in the next video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Again, be sure to subscribe. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I've got my email down in the description. Lots of ways to get a hold of me. All right, I'll see you guys later.